In this video, I wanted to recreate the shot from Superman Returns, where he shoots a bullet at Superman's eye and it just bounces off. This shot in particular had a huge impact on me as a kid, and I still remember it to this day. My name is Will, and this is the first episode of Will It VFX. This shot actually took a lot more work than I was initially expecting, but the way that I ended up doing the effects was about how I envisioned it from the beginning. First of all, I was able to get my younger brother Henry to actually help me out with this project. We took an airsoft gun, went to our backyard, and shot a little short film. I filmed this video at 120 frames per second and just figured that I could make it slow motion after the fact. I actually ended up taking this shot, putting it into DaVinci Resolve, and then using their built-in interpolation features to actually make it look like 30 FPS in slow-mo. Originally, it was kind of jittery. Because it was only 120 FPS and I wasn't shooting in slow-mo, it wasn't that smooth. But the interpolation actually ended up looking really, really good. So I got this result from it. First, I went ahead and got a reference photo of an AR-15 round, and I started modeling the casing and the bullet itself so that I could have those 3D models to be used in the final result of the shot. I actually ended up using the roughness of the bullet and the casing to drive the actual roughness of the 3D model here, using just a simple shader setup. After getting the bullet and the casing modeled, I went ahead and started to line up the camera and set up the scene so that I could actually make this shot happen. I took the bullet and animated it at a speed that seemed to work, and I just hid the bullet on the frame where I wanted it to be invisible, and then unhid the bullet from the render right when I wanted the bullet to actually shoot out. After looking at a lot of reference footage, I realized that one thing I wanted to add to increase the realism quite a bit was to actually add the casing launching out of the gun after the bullet was fired. This is actually something that you can see in the original shot as well. When it pans under and you can see the bullet falling down, you can also see the bullet shell ejecting out of the side of the gun. To do that, I realized that the gun would actually be in front of the bullet casing, so I had to create some kind of mask or some kind of object that would get in the way, and then animate it as the gun moves so that the bullet would end up behind the gun in the final shot. The solution that I ended up on was kind of janky. I literally just took a two-dimensional plane and cut it out to roughly match the same shape as the gun, and then tried to animate it in time with the bullet casing as it moved along. The hardest part of this process was the fact that the gun was actually changing perspective when it kicks back into Henry's shoulder, so I ended up having to do some weird scaling and moving around, as well as trying to dial in the actual speed and time of that casing firing out of the gun was kind of difficult to match up with the actual mask object that I was tracking on top of the gun itself. In the end, I think it turned out looking pretty good. Another thing I noticed is that when I was trying to find reference imagery for muzzle flashes for an AR-15 style rifle like this one, I noticed that at this speed, you basically just see smoke. There may be a flash in some of them, but a lot of the times you just see the smoke actually exiting the barrel of the gun. So, taking this into a software that I use called Embergen, I actually went ahead and simulated a bit of smoke coming out of the front of a gun, trying to line up that camera perspective as best as I could so that you could actually see it actually looked like the smoke was puffing and blowing out of the end of the gun after the bullet was fired. After I had a result that looked good enough to me, I decided to render that out and put it into the composite of the Blender scene. Altogether, that shot I think came out looking pretty good, and it took me a couple of hours to get that one dialed down and ready to go. Now came the fun shot of actually trying to make it look like there was a bullet bouncing off of my eye in this shot. First, I needed to actually get a photo scan of my own head. Now, I actually already had a working photo scan of my face, and I decided to use that one. On the day of shooting, we actually went and did a secondary photo scan of my head, but the results actually didn't end up turning out that good, so I decided to just go with this one. It took a second for me to line up my face the way that I was liking, but because I knew that I was shooting at 100mm focal length on my camera on the day, I was able to set the digital camera to be that, and then I eventually was able to line up my face so that it's pretty close and accurate to, for example, where my eyes are positioned and my nose in the actual shot. Initially, I just animated the bullet itself moving towards the eye, and then I realized that I wanted to be able to add actually a little bit of rotation to the bullet itself so that it looked a bit more realistic. It wasn't so CGI looking. And I realized that I do this every time. It's something that I always forget about, but you should really just parent the object to an empty first and then animate the empty. So if you want the object to do individual rotations, it won't end up getting all these weird funky keyframing rotations after the fact. So I had to go back and actually redo the animation of the bullet flying towards my eye, simply because I hadn't planned ahead and parented it to an empty and then just animated the empty along a path. The original plan that I had set out for this effect was to actually just use what are called shape keys to drive the bullet squishing against my eyeball. A shape key is essentially just a way that you can take an object and you give it a state of being, so like how you want the model to be from the beginning, and then you set another one. You can edit the model, sculpt it, squish it, move it around, and then you can actually just animate a value of that object switching between those two different states. In the end, this is the shape I ended up going with, and while I don't think it's perfect and I wish that I could spend a little bit more time on it, I think it ended up turning out pretty good in the final shot. You can see the shape key just allows it to go from one position to another with that simple sculpt so that I could animate it over time as the bullet flies into my eyeball. In order to get accurate reflections, I needed to actually project the texture of my face from that still frame onto the 3D model of my face and onto the eyeballs, so that the bullet itself would pick up the reflections of those objects in three-dimensional space. You can see that I went ahead and did that here with the face, which actually produces some kind of funny results when you look around at the other side. Because there's no information of what is on the other side of my face in that shot, it just ends up kind of reprojecting some of these elements back onto the other side of the face. It looks really trippy, but obviously from the camera view, you can't even tell that there's any weirdness. And that was basically it for the technical aspect of the 3D elements themselves. I made sure to make the eyeball objects very reflective and shiny so that they would actually capture the reflections a little bit, just to get that subtle hint of realism when the bullet actually hits my eye in the final shot. This actually ended up taking a lot longer than I thought it would. This shot, even though there's technically less components going on, there's no smoke simulations or anything like that, it actually took quite a bit longer than the first shot. I ended up having to do a lot of manual keyframing of the animation. For example, when that bullet bounces off of the eyeball itself, trying to get a natural rotation and speed of it bouncing off the object, as well as just trying to dial in all of the different lights in the scene. You can see I have a lot of different lights over here that are influencing the reflections of the bullet in the final shot. Then all that was left to do was compositing, which I'll be honest, I'm really not that good at compositing. It's definitely not my strong suit. I've been trying to get quite a bit better at it recently, and I ended up with a fairly complicated node setup here. As you can see on the image itself, I added a lot of different things just to kind of bring back that graininess. When you render something out of CGI, it tends to be ultra sharp. There's no noise hitting the sensor of the camera in 3D space. So I ended up using some defocusing, adding a little bit of sensor noise, bringing down some of the saturation with a hue, saturation, and value node, bringing down the exposure a little bit, and even using an unsharp mask to try and crunch a little bit of those values like you see here. And the result, I think, ended up looking pretty good. The bullet actually is quite a different color in the final composite than it is in the raw CGI render. That was because as I went along, I just did a lot of experimentation to try and see what would make this look more grounded into the scene itself. The actual change that I mostly made was to desaturate it a little bit and then tint it a little bit blue so that the shadows and the dark spaces would actually be a little bit blue, like you can kind of see here in the shot, and also just trying to dial that sort of grainy look, but make sure that the highlights on and the specular dots on the bullet themselves actually pop through like you see in the underlying footage. The 3D model of my face here and the eyeball are being used as shadow capture objects. So in the final render, you actually don't necessarily see these objects, but they pick up the shadows of the lights in the scene and then bounce them onto the 3D model somewhat realistically. As you can see here, the bullet getting close to my eye, you can see that there's actually some shadow being cast onto my face. And this is something that just really helps the realism look quite a bit better when you're doing anything in CGI. I always like to make sure that I either have a photo scan of the object I want my CG models to interact with, or have a plan on how I can actually create those 3D models, just so that I know going in, I have something that can influence the lighting and the shadow direction. After all of that, it was time for me to drop these visual effect shots into the edit of the short film I shot, and I think it turned out pretty fun. So let's go ahead and watch that now.
Henry, I need you to shoot me in the face right now. You ready? Yep, I'm ready. Just right here, right in the eyeball. Cool. Oh man, that actually worked.
How did you do that?
Oh, that's why I wanted you to shoot me in the eyeball, because I'm testing out my new bulletproof contact lenses.
This project was a ton of fun to work on, and I'm super excited that I finally got to do it. I've had this project in mind for a very long time, so it was awesome to actually be able to sit down and get this all done. The first video that I actually dropped on this channel was a video showcasing an extension that I created for Blender 5.0 and above to streamline the process of creating lightsaber visual effects within Blender, and it makes the process a bit smoother and does some of the steps for you. So if you want to go check out that video, you can find it on the channel. Be ready for more Will It VFX episodes in the future. We're going to have a ton of fun, and I hope to see you guys on another video. Thanks for watching.